Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for taking the time to attend this afternoon's webinar on 10 loss and supply chain projects everyone should do. We're calling it 10 loss and supply chain carnival prizes. Everyone's a winner. We've had several webinars yesterday and today. We have 3 more tomorrow. I would like to thank everybody that's involved behind the camera, our cameraman Dan, Carlos, Greg, Bill, Logan. It takes a little bit of effort to put these together and have all the technology work, so much appreciated. Very excited today. Ms. Kowal, our presenter, has invited me to present with her. I think she was hoping for a pretty face, but I will not go gentle into that good night. I plan to talk plenty and have a great time in front of the camera. They don't give me many opportunities. 2 quick housekeeping notes before we get started. First and foremost, Mr. Bill Getty would like you to know that we will be recording this webinar. It takes us about a week to get it edited and up into YouTube. And once we do, our good friend Logan Miller will be emailing everybody that's attended the link so they can share it and watch it as often as they like. Secondly, we love questions. It's great to have a feedback loop. Anything you want to throw at us, especially really hard ones for Stephanie, more than welcome. And with that, I think I'm allowed to drive. And
we already have a question.
Oh, shoot.
It's probably not a question, it's more of a statement, and it says, if you really want to impress us before the webinar, we'd like to see a cartwheel.
You're counting on Stephanie for that one because I am not going to be able to execute that feat. But I understand that Mr. Bill Getty, if you sit here for the full hour, will be doing one at 4 p.m. Eastern today. Well worth the wait. So before we get started here, I just want to talk about sort of the genesis of this presentation. You know, there's sort of a sister one that's going on right now with HR, and eventually we'll have one for finance. But this was sort of sitting back and looking at projects that we feel that every organization, especially healthcare ones, should undertake to improve their supply chain. And some of these run the gamut from sort of do-it-yourself to more elaborate ones that you might need some planning and support for. But definitely things that you should have in your radar. Obviously, we have a broad set of clients that attend these, so some of you may already be in process of rolling these out or have already rolled these out, and we're going to try to cater to that full spectrum depending on where you are, what next steps are, because Stephanie's a big believer in continuous improvement, which makes her great for running some of these projects. And I think that I'll take the about RPI. You can see she's very creative as well. I think one of the fun things about RPI is there's a lot of cool, talented people with a lot of energy that like to get stuff done, and sometimes very motivating, very exciting to work with them. Very exciting to work with Ms. Kowal, not just for myself, but the entire RPI team I think I speak for. So let's get started. So our number 1 project that every supply chain department should do.
MSCM. So this is all-encompassing to par counting, cycle counting, and receiving and delivery. So if you're not utilizing MSCM today, it's a fairly low timeline for implementation. It minimizes a lot of paperwork for your supply chain, streamlines the whole process. And here you can see a couple screen grabs of what some of this access looks like. Even if you're utilizing this today, you may not be fully taking advantage of all the enhancements. So utilizing my par forms, quantity on order, max order quantity, even taking into consideration some of the badge access that you can use. So if you're using signatures, if you have the employee ID as part of your badge, you can use that as a barcode scan. And still require them to do the signature, but sometimes it can be very difficult to tell who the name is on the signature. So by using the badge, it will pull all that information in for you.
So a couple things just to add to that, again, on the full gamut. If you don't have MSCM today, the first thing is you want to make sure that you have licensing, but I believe that most organizations are licensed for it. So once you verify that, what it really takes is it runs on its own separate server. But it's not intensive in terms of hardware requirements. So you'll need to set that up. It's not a big project. And obviously sync it in with Lawson. and you'll need some handhelds. And the handhelds run, I think, about $1,200 a pop or so. There's a gentleman that shows up to all the user groups that they sell them. And it really depends on the size of your organization. You know, big organizations we know might have 40 of them for all their part counters and so forth. But if you run in shifts, maybe you have 4 or 5 people counting at a time, you might not need that many to get started. And it's better to have some of the stuff automated than none. And I will say that, you know, for those of you that are using PAR, we've seen great return on people using them for cycle counts. I think actually Brent Bauer did a project where he saw that the yearly physical inventory variance was diminished by like 80% by implementing these bi-monthly cycle counts. And obviously our colleague Dan Ferruggio has had the opportunity to implement RAD in quite a few places. And you know, it's something that I feel like, you know, if you have the manpower internally, you can just do. I mean, the documentation's out there. You can read through it. You can test it. If you were to hire us, it wouldn't be a big project. So, you know, either way, MSCM, easy to swallow, not a big project, and you get a great return from the folks that are using it. They see the benefit of the system.
Absolutely. And even with the PAR cycle counting, taking a look at your select IDs again, you may have had them built by bin groups, and there's additional configurations that you can do through movement class or by special item groups, which can help optimize the cycle count process. So definitely check that out.
Awesome. All right. Number 2, project every supply chain organization should undertake.
So very, very passionate about mastering your data. So with version 11, there is additional auditing features. So even if you're on 9 today, make sure that in your ICO1 setup that you are auditing your item master and item source changes. With 10, you are now able to audit changes to your PO vendor item, agreements, templates, a whole bunch of additional changes here. So this not only helps you track any kind of KPIs, how many changes are made in the system, but also trying to troubleshoot issues or just manage your information. So you likely have a MMIS team that's managing or trying to manage your item master. They get interrupted various times throughout the day, or perhaps can't finish the process because there's open transactions. So by building some custom reports yourself to check some of these areas, see what's missing, you really can help get a better control over the data. Also utilizing other tools like GHX's Nuvia or Vizian's data links. You know, they don't answer all of your questions 100%, all of those needs that you have, but they can help you get some of that information, and then having a process on how that detail is managed in your system. So that's a good place to start.
You mentioned version 11. I think you meant version 10.
sorry.
You just have version 11 on the mind.
Yes.
We're obviously very excited about version 11. But you know, I think when I look at master your data, I think, and I've spoken to a lot of organizations that understand that their item master, either because it was, you know, it's been developed over the years, or it's compiled maybe from, you know, a couple item masters that got cobbled together, and also their vendor master, they know that it probably stands to improve. And I think that it just seems so big. It's like how do you even start? So let's say I'm an organization, you know, we acquired another organization, we slammed the item master in. I know it's kind of messy. How do I even start attacking that?
Okay, so there's a lot of different ways that you can go about it, and you need to, because data comes in from a lot of different places, and you're not always communicated certain changes. So one area is the communication between AP and supply chain. So AP may be making some changes with the vendor master, inactivated one vendor, created a brand new one. You know, building some auditing reports yourself, pulling some queries out of the system by matching up your item source or even your vendor agreements with the vendor master and looking for anything that has that D, add, inactivate, or inactivate status, and see what records you still have open in supply chain and IC and PO tables. So from there, you can make any necessary changes on your POs and also your item master files. Another area which I don't see too often, and it can be very difficult, you know, a lot of you may be adding items to your item master for any kind of interface to your clinical system, and they may not be purchased that often. So usually you find out that something's wrong with your item master when you try to purchase the item and you get that exception back. Oftentimes just that one item is changed instead of looking at the full item master and other open POs and just doing a sort by vendor, by that manufacturer number, and seeing what else needs to be changed. So there's a little bit more proactive work that can be done, and the more you pinpoint some of these scenarios, you can build some reports off of that to have them stand out to you sooner before the exception happens.
So I totally hear that you're controlling the process to stop the bleeding. I think on as far as what you have existing, you could do some incremental stuff. And attacking an entire item master, it might seem overwhelming, but you can start with simple tasks and give your organization enough time. The most important thing in terms of identifying and cleansing item master is standardization, right? Your naming conventions, your manufacturer numbers. I mean, those are things you can just be attacking subsets at a time, leveraging the resources you have, and then you can start taking to the next level and being about dupes and checking in on measures and all that other kind of stuff. And every time you change those, you have consequences. But basically, it's a lot to chew on at once, but you can take some pieces.
Yeah, even one more thing.
Sure, please.
Item descriptions.
Yes.
A lot you can just do with some Excel formulas. I myself just Google a bunch of different things to try to figure out what's the best way to do it. But looking at all the first words that you have built in your item description, making sure that if you've done any abbreviations, that you look back to see if all of that one word is abbreviated to stay consistent, and then utilizing the synonyms that's mostly used for our QC, IC32, to have those built. So if someone clinical is searching for catheter and you have it abbreviated as cath, that will show up when they're searching through our QC. So those are just some simple things, somewhat simple, that you just have to pull that information down, try to find what you're looking for, make sure that you're communicating to others, and a lot you can update through uploads.
And know that they're out there, right? Those synonyms, they tend to get built during the implementation and maybe not revisited later. So it's just good to know. There's a lot of functionality sometimes we don't look at every day.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to number 3. Clean up your open transactions. So, this is something that, we've encountered a lot, especially as we do cleanups. Sometimes the symptoms are things like, R&I because it pops up in the balance sheet, and, finance department starts asking questions. But in general, Lawson is a data system that needs to be maintained, right? Just like you hopefully, brush your teeth on a regular basis, you want to go out and sort of clean up the leftovers that are there dated. Open POs from 2002 do no one any benefits, right? And they have repercussions in terms of that. I've heard stories that we can't run that PO 220 because it's 500 pages, right? But it's 500 pages because you have all these open POs that you haven't maintained. You have open PO lines, open service lines, you have R&I. And so let's talk a little bit about attacking those things, right? Because these are a lot of great, almost do-it-yourself projects, right? It's stuff that we've done before ourselves. But when you're looking at open PO lines, that's really about order quantities that have not been received, right? And you can just query your PO line table, right? Look for order quantities, look for received quantities, and look for canceled quantities. And you're just looking for that differential, and right from there you can build an upload to cancel those remainings. And I know in the past it was a challenge sometimes because you did that through a change on the FC field, and you put in that cancel quantity, and then you had to go release the PO. There was an automated mechanism. But now you can use that, I think it's that L, that cancel remaining, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't unrelease the PO. So, that's sort of a simple, low-hanging fruit. That PO from 2002, it came or didn't come, it's not coming tomorrow, right? I think similarly, it's a little bit different with the service POs, right? Because that cancel remaining doesn't exactly work. And what you're going to want to do there is you're going to want to probably change the dollars to be what you have outstanding. But again, it just doesn't help anyone to have that open historically. Similarly, R&I, really what R&I are is just open receipts, right? And R&I is a natural part of the cycle, as are open orders. We're not saying go close the stuff from last week. But R&I, if it's 2 years old and the vendor hasn't gotten paid, they're probably not going to invoice you much less from something from 1998, 1999. You know, R&I cleanup, there's some decisions that have to be made organizationally. And what we found is best is to get AP and purchasing and finance together. And then to sort of automate the process of closing those old lines, either using archiving or going direct, and sort of just closing all that stuff out. At the end of the day, what those three things are doing for you is they're flipping that flag on the PO line to close, right? Mm-hmm. That close flag is really important. And that purchase order header, basically, it tracks the number of lines. There's a field that says number of lines, 59, and there's a field that says number of closed lines, 58. And when those two match, and you run that PO 190, everybody should run the PO 190. It does no harm. All the PO 190 is doing is saying, if those two lines match, those two quantities, flip the purchase order to close. And when that purchase order header is flipped to close, it doesn't show up on that open PO report and a lot of other places. Now, it's got to match exact, right? So 59, 58, it won't. If it's 59 lines that it thinks are on the PO and it thinks 60 are closed, it's not going to close either, which sort of brings us to our next thing, which is dealing with orphan records, which is something that definitely happens in Lawson.
Absolutely.
Maybe you wanna, yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes what can happen is it's just a system issue or bug, and Lawson's working on a patch, or you are in the middle of a patch.
No bugs.
Yeah, and it left a record open that you can't close. So sometimes you utilize paint screens, and when you are utilizing those paint screens, Infor is very specific on what fields need to be changed and how, and in what order. And if one of those things are missed, oftentimes it can leave those open orphan records. Sometimes things can just get frozen in the system, so some warehouse demand is a table that can get a little bit busy, and that will add some additional records to your stock on hand detail, which often causes you to not be able to close a record. So working directly with Infor to make sure that you have the right process to clean up those orphan records is really important. You can do that by opening an incident with them.
And it sounds like a lot to tackle, but once you get into it, it really isn't. It is something that you can sort of manage on the side. I think the opening the Infor ticket is really good, because at the end of the day, you're probably going to paint screen, but it's nice when they say you have to do it, right? Instead of saying we're not responsible. It looks like we have a question. If that question is whether PO 25.7 connects with lease management, the answer is still we don't know. But what do we have now?
I'm not sure if it's a question or a statement, but we'll try it anyway. For service lines, canceling the remaining from the action bar on the header will close out service lines created in version 9.
That's awesome. So basically what we're saying is that the cancel remaining from the header will close out the open service lines. And again, I think this is just a maintenance thing, and sort of twofold. Just like when we talk about R&I, there's ongoing maintenance, which everybody should have, just monitoring and cleanup, it's a little bit easier. And then there's, hey, we implemented again, 15 years, nobody's ever done this, and we have all these open transactions. But it's certainly something that's very overcomable. And there's some sort of vendor agreement purge that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, so PO 300. You may have had Lawson for about 10 years, and you have all of these vendor agreements that might have expired. Maybe you've had a process where you just make a change to that vendor agreement and extend the expiration date. So you actually can purge those, and we've seen a lot of different organizations have processes quarterly to help clean up some of that detail. And that will help make your vendor agreement line table a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to run some reports on. It also helps your buyers or contract analysts that may be utilizing PO 28 to try to find the open costs and not have to add all these filters. So definitely something good to look into. If you're in the functional area, you likely don't have direct access since it is a purge table. But take a look at that and work with your IT team to test out that process.
And then what about the IC 216?
Oh, IC 216. So this is a new report that was added in version 10. And this can be run by item, and it will actually show you all of the open transactions that are within IC, order entry, warehouse requisitions and PO. So it's used for unit and measure changes, but I imagine it can be used for any kind of inactivation, or if you're going through a conversion to a new item and you want to see what's out there. Instead of having to pull all of these queries through MS add-ins or Crystal reports or a custom report, you can now utilize the IC216.
Cool. That brings us. I'm sorry, you got another question?
We do. And we keep on having people come in, like, I think people are coming in off the street to watch this webinar. Is doing DVT still the best way to clean up orphan records?
DVT, like through an upload?
I'm assuming data validation, something T.
Oh. So it doesn't work for all records. So using the it's like PO4. It's all those different screens. Yes.
So mostly we've used paint screens, but don't tell us.
So the data integrity checks are definitely helpful. They will help clean up some of those orphan records if it can make that connection. But if any little piece is off, it's not going to find every single one. So I would definitely follow the M4 process of going through those reports, but just know that you're still going to need to check for other things on your own.
Going to number 4.
We do have one more question, and that is, we have contract management and have our vendor agreements now going through that application and have all of our old PO25s. That should be removed.
That's a great question.
Yeah, using PO 300 will definitely help purge some of those older records and make sure that what you have in the system is more current. It's okay to have agreements still built in the system that aren't valid anymore. You want to give yourself a little bit of a background to see what other agreements it was on in previous months or maybe the fiscal year before it. But you don't necessarily need to know about 10 years prior. You may want to keep some sort of archive of what records it found that it's now purging, but that's a much smaller file, not in your system.
Number 4, leverage the EDI.
Yeah, so EDI is not adopted overnight. Even if you have this in place now, you may only have one transaction set. So it's definitely smart to continue to take a look at this. And even not to try to focus on having every single vendor be set up via EDI, but just try to get as much adoption as you can for your highest vendors.
So completely, I feel like this is actually a pretty old technology and sometimes it gets dismissed, but I'm always surprised that not organizations have a lot of adoption with it. And, you're taking one end of the spectrum where people are like, I'm going to get 100 vendors on EDI, and, you start to see really diminishing marginal returns. But you get your top 10, 20 vendors, there's a lot of value. You're automating a lot of processes out there and enables confirmations, which are obviously very useful. And I actually believe in the other side where you get the invoices in. And when you're getting the invoices in, definitely I would say, target your top 5 vendors. There is work. So, these things are all going to match, and there's these staging tables and screens that you use to work them. And so you go to an organization that's more mature, and they're like, oh, it's a lot of work, but it's the work that 5 people could be doing that mostly one person can process. It's tremendous efficiency, especially if you're able to reallocate those other resources towards process improvement. I think this is probably surprisingly still low-hanging fruit. And, it's low barrier to entry. You either go to the GHX or you map directly. But in terms of loss and configuration and so forth, it's just not that much work.
Yeah, agreed. And 855s, too, even if you're just utilizing 850s and you don't have invoices yet, the PO confirmations, the acknowledgments are really, really easy to implement. It's additional configuration for your ED10 record. And then you run, once you get the inbound in, you run PO 122. And what that will do is write that acknowledgement to your PO revision table. So your buyers will be able to utilize PO 66 or even just drilling around on that PO and see when it was acknowledged. So yes, they can still go into GHX for that detail. But now, since that's in Lawson in a table, you can report on it and help automate that confirmation process.
There's one wish that Stephanie has for the world at large. It's for everybody to work their PO confirmations. Number 5. I see 11 replacement items.
Yes. So I'm very passionate about replacement items. This has not gotten a lot of play. It's a little bit confusing or intimidating, I should say, but it can be very, very helpful. So the replacement item has been out since 901, I believe, and just recently, I think it was 901.15, they actually added in date ranges. So what the replacement item field does is if a requester is requesting one item and it has zero stock on hand, it's not available, it will actually try to replenish using the replacement item. So it can have a certain date range. So if you have a substitute process in play and that item has been approved, you can add it here in this field here and it will optimize it for your requesters.
Cool. Number 6. RQC.
So another thing I'm very, very passionate about, if you're not utilizing RQC today, roll it out. Plain and simple. Yeah.
You own it. I almost guarantee it. Yeah.
It's very easy to implement. Helps speed up the process for the requesters, not having to utilize RQ10. It's even if you choose to not implement it for specials and service, it's very helpful for material staff who could be utilizing MSCM today. But sometimes it's quicker to just order that one item through RQC. You also can leverage IPA to do requisition approvals. RQC does have a few things out of the box that you can use approval codes, but we really don't see anyone utilizing those anymore, and IPA is definitely the way to go for email approvals to help optimize that process. And punch out. So if you click it just 2 more times,
yeah.
Keith, we have some screen prints here. So punch out, again, very easy to implement. Infor has a selected list, I believe, of about 30 different vendors that are approved by Infor, who we've done a good amount of work with already. Very easy to implement. So here you're utilizing the vendor's catalog to purchase your products, but your requesters aren't going to their website directly. It's through RQC. So those requesters will have a special task assigned to their RQ04 record. It's not every single requester that would have access. And then they go to Find Shop, Punch Out, and they would select the vendor that they're wishing to punch out to. And then here it brings them to the vendor site, and then they choose to check out, and it brings them right back into Requisition Center. So here you're working with the vendor to come up with your own catalog. It's utilizing your own contract pricing through your account number. The only thing that isn't automatically stored that you would want to work with with that vendor on is bringing back that GL account unit. They're not sure what account within that account unit this needs to get charged to. So the requester could always do that themselves when it comes back to the requisition lines and click on each item and change that, or do it on the header. But to help optimize that process, you do want to work with your vendor.
So, I think it's a really exciting concept, right? Because you can negotiate contract pricing for 30,000 items and not load them into your item master or your PO25s, because who would possibly want to do that? And basically you put it on the vendor to manage that for you and to limit, that selection. So, things like office supplies, it makes a lot of sense. And definitely the folks that have rolled it out, high satisfaction rating. I want to add one thing before we dive a little bit deeper is, Stephanie and I were talking about, as a supply chain department, RQC is your portal to your customers, right? You might have 500, 1,000 people using it and interact with you. So even if you have it rolled out, I think it's a great thing to take a look at and say, could we be doing this better? Could we be changing it? What could we add to it? It is sort of the technology facing your user base.
Absolutely. This is what your requesters see. So making just a few of these changes can really change their view of the supply chain and give them the detail that they need at their fingertips. And a lot of the items that they'd be getting through Grainger or Office Max, it's a manual process. If they go through special service, they have to type that in every time. The buyer needs to look at those items because they're special. It can slow down the process for everyone, and it can be frustrating. So, I think that sometimes punch out is intimidating, but it's really not. There's not too much of an effort that's needed, and it has a high satisfaction rate.
Totally. You can even take it on internally if you have the right resources.
Absolutely.
All right, and bonus.
Yes. Another area is receiving self-service. I find that if you've had a requisition center implemented for a couple years now, you may have chose not to allow receiving self-service, or one of my next slides here. And the users that implemented it, you may not even know that this is here. So this is just another user interface for processing a receipt. So you can do that through a handheld, you can do that through PO30, or you can go through receiving self-service. And it just looks a little bit nicer. It's a little bit easier. I think it's one less click. And it gives the same information, it just looks a little bit nicer. So this may not work for every single receiving department, but I found that this can easily be implemented in areas that do not have a receiving area. It could be a clinic, but you still want that three-way match, and you don't want them to scan that delivery document and send it over to receiving in a different area to have them do the actual receipt. You can build some special security in Lawson to just allow them to see certain receipts, not everyone. So you can be a little bit creative with this to make it work for your organization.
We have a question.
Sure.
Okay, I think so can you lock people down to only certain POs and locations?
Yes, absolutely. So I found that this is a little bit more easily done if you do it by ship to location. So it's not something out of the box. It would just have to be configured in a rule within Lawson Security.
Okay. Rec status.
Yes, very exciting. Requisition status is not only great for the requester, but it's great for the buyers at your organization. So this is another kind of add-on in Requisition Center that's a part of the bookmarks. You may not see it today if you're not a portal bookmark administrator, but it's there. You just have to be added as a user that has access to it. And this actually has a very, very nice user interface. It will allow the requester, it defaults to their information for their requester identity for their RQ04 details. And here they have some special filters. It will let them know their requisition number. If you have requisition approvals enabled, there's a little org chart. They could hover their mouse over it, and it will let them know where it's at in the approval process. And then there's actually a line details area, which is down here, and you probably can't see it very well since it's small, but it will actually let them know the PO number that was assigned to that requisition. So instead of calling purchasing, where's my overnight request? Is a PO assigned yet? They can look themselves here. And if you're utilizing PO comments and have a standardized process, they actually can select that PO number and drill around in the PO detail. So this is another area that if you give direct access to requisition status, yes, they can change the requester ID. They can search for other people's information if you have it open-ended. I found that this isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you don't have any type of contract exclusions for different areas in your facility, it's not necessarily a bad thing for them to see what others have been requesting.
And for those that are looking for something more advanced on the RQC.
Yes, imaging integration. So here's the picture. So adding images to your item master in IC11, there's an attachments area. So here it's just looking for a URL. So we've seen organizations work with their vendors to pull their item catalog It does need to tie to your item master number. These can be stored in your server, and then you're just noting the URL of where that image can be found. This will actually show up when they search the item and then select the item hyperlink, and it will bring it to the item detail with more information, and the image will display here. Again, we've seen organizations work with their main vendors, their distributors, to try to pull the images that they have available. We've seen organizations take pictures themselves and upload them in. But it can be really, really helpful, and it's definitely a satisfier for requesters.
Your end users.
And one area I didn't include in here, but it's also imaging integration, is working with your imaging system to attach quotes to your requests. So that can be very helpful for special or service requests where it may have a quote available that you want the requester to be able to attach to the requisition. So we've seen that as well.
And
double bonus RQC.
Double bonus. We got some more bonus stuff for you here on RQC. I'm starting with templates.
Yes. So if you're not utilizing templates today, you really should. It's PO15, yes. And that's another area that there's actually bookmarks within that RQC, the Requisition Center bookmarks, where requesters can maintain their own templates themselves if you give them access to, which can also optimize the process. It's one of those, you break it, you buy it. If they delete it, they have access to delete it. You didn't stop them, it's going to be gone. But that's another area to look at.
But even for those of you that have already implemented templates.
Exactly. So as you may be aware, there's not a way to tell whether or not those templates are being used out of the box. There's no report to run canned that lets you know, we added this template last year, it's 200 items. How do I know if these 200 items are still active? Should I remove them from the template? They're not being used, or do I need to add more? So you have to be creative by pulling those, the PO line detail. We definitely recommend that. It's not that it's easily done. It just takes a pretty low effort, and then you can maintain it moving forward.
I don't feel like it's rocket science either, right? No. The PO line detail, it's got the source. I mean, that's a nice process improvement project to look at what are my rec locations buying, and does it match what they have on the templates?
Definitely. Just taking a look at what participants have access to use it, and then making sure you take into consideration that maybe one of those locations is still utilizing the item, and maybe you want to keep it on there. Another area is your requesters. So, again, you may have been using RQC for about 5 years. You just keep adding new requesters. Maybe you were notified that they may have left or moved to a different department. So finding a process to manage that. And one thing that you can easily do is pulling that requester table, and then pulling the most recent requisitions and seeing if one has been made in the past year, 2 years, 6 months, and then working to inactivate those and remove that requester ID from their identity within loss and security, or maybe even remove them as a user in loss and security.
I mean, typically that has sort of a different licensing impact than your regular core users. So you want to maintain it, at some point in time. We'll audit, and you'll have all these requesters that haven't logged in 3 years, and you certainly don't want to pay for them.
Absolutely. So sometimes you can leverage your IT policies if they have one for their Active Directory users, and then work off of that to just have a process and maintain ongoing. And another area is your requesting locations. So again, another area that you may have added on throughout the years. And like I was mentioning earlier with AP and supply chain speaking to each other when they're modifying records, and sometimes it's hard to see the whole picture. Same thing happens for requesting locations. So finance may have made a change to account unit, not necessarily realize there was open transactions out there, and requesting locations is one of them. There isn't a report today that lets you know, hey, these requesting locations are out there, but the account unit isn't active anymore. Once you go to change that record, it tells you, won't let you change it, but having a process to maintain those as well.
And before we go on to the next one, some debates as to best way to set up templates. Is it by vendor, category, department? Do you want to wade into that debate at all, or stay neutral?
I am a big proponent of by department. I think it's a little bit easier to manage. I think even building them by company can be really helpful if you have like a disaster preparedness item list or anything like that. Once you're by vendor, I find that then it ends up being by requesting department. So you have a cost center, and then you have about 50 different templates by vendor of who they're ordering for. And your PO 100 helps you parse that out anyways. So, optimizing your item descriptions and making sure that your keywords are set up really helps the requester where they should be able to find what they're looking for without you having to segregate them that much.
Awesome. And that takes us to number 7, master the LBI.
Yes.
Now, before Stephanie gets started, most organizations have LBI. You probably have it. You may be using it, but not fully. It may be in use in other areas of the organization. I mean, typically, it's sort of a low barrier to deploy, and it doesn't always sort of permeate the organization. So chances are you have LBI, and if you do, it's a great tool.
Absolutely. So you can create role-based dashboards, and here you can utilize Crystal reports to post those reports to those areas where they can run them on their own. There's report bursting, so this can be really helpful for financials for the statement of expense to drill that down and only give them access to the cost centers that they have access to. You also can build some metrics for your management and have a KPI dashboard, let's say. You don't have to necessarily just use loss in data. You can pull data from other sources as well and have that on your dashboard. So this can be very, very specific to certain areas. Some of those master your data ideas that we had before, once you kind of figure out these common issues and build a report around that, you can have that out there in that dashboard. So, certain key players in those areas are constantly monitoring those and cleaning up those records before they become an issue later down the line. And part of LBI is smart notifications. This is a really, really great tool that we haven't seen heavily utilized, or at least I haven't, which you can do a lot of really neat things with it. So this is actually a PO23 worksheet that was created. And this is a smart notification that's run ad hoc. Basically, it's like a bookmark that you can select. And here it's pulling up all of the PO23 records by company, tells them the vendor number, what rec number it came from, how it was sourced, where the cost came from, whether it was entered, whether it came from the last unit cost, whether it came from an agreement, lets them know when it was released, and also gives them a alert flag. So red was when it has been sitting there for a few days, green as if it was from the same day. So it's just like a quick snapshot to give the user everything that they're looking for in that one screen. There's also another view here, and this was an email notification that was created when item master was inactivated. So you can have distribution lists, have this run at the end of each day or end of each month, and pulls that information together for that line of logic that you wrote and gives that back to you. If you're utilizing Smart Office, there's also watch list functionality that's actually utilizing smart notifications where that's more of a ad hoc alert. So you're making a change in IC11 and you want to know when it's been inactivated. So once that trigger happens, it will send you an alert to your watch list, which is a widget on your desktop.
And so, just looking at it from the perspective of anyone that's out there, these aren't hard things to do, right? There's sort of two elements in there. One is knowing what stuff you maybe should be looking for, potentially like the PO23 worksheets. Exception-based stuff lends itself really well to smart notifications. And the second is having that expertise internally, right? Maybe your IT department has someone that's pretty familiar with LBI, can do this, but it takes almost no time at all to create this.
Absolutely.
I mean, this isn't like some big deal, right? It's like
just having someone that's excited and can work with a lot of these different areas. What's frustrating you? Let's see if we can get an alert out there to communicate. That cost center issue that I was just speaking about, you could create a smart notification that says every time a cost center is inactivated, alert these mailboxes, and then someone monitors those mailboxes and inactivates the rest of the records, or you could build an IPA flow that does that for you. Another area that I've seen as very, very useful is the items that are automatically killed. So if a requester is an RQC and they may not be paying attention, ordering off a template, didn't look at the stock on hand, ordered it anyways, and some of them were killed. You can build a smart note where it will notify that requester to let them know that those items they won't be receiving. So helpful if you're utilizing RAD with a signature and you're not necessarily giving them a paper delivery document for them to see everything. So it just gives them, you're communicating with them. It enhances that requester experience.
I have a question. Can you create a smart notification on an IC81 change?
Absolutely. Any type of trigger in the system. So IC81 changes are also audited.
In 10.
Also in 9.
Okay.
So it's part of item location. So when you're making a change to IC81, it writes to that IC12 table within that item location. So you can audit them there as well. So yes.
Cool. Smart office watch lists.
Yes.
Okay. Want to say anything about that, or we're good?
No, I think we're good.
All right, perfect. Number 8. Attack X-type specials. This is when aliens invade your carnival and you need to get rid of them. You know, I think it's one of those things where we tend to be reactive to them, but we can be proactive. We can get tired of swatting at flies, and we want to go after these X-types where they live. So let's talk about that a little bit. What are some strategies for minimizing your X-types and thereby increasing contract compliance?
Yes. So one pretty easy thing that you can do is just double check your RQC config file, work with your IT department, make sure that if you are utilizing special service through RQC, that you have the warn feature on. And what this will do is if a requester's typing in that part number and it has a match to your item master or a vendor item, it will let the requester know that one's already been built. So they're not ordering an item as a special if it's actually already built in your item master. That helps the requester out too, because it will help default a lot of that information in for them, that GL account unit. So that's definitely one fairly easy thing that you can just double check.
Low-hanging fruit.
Yep, and make sure that you have that implemented. Another area is managing those specials through PO23. So having your buyer work those items through that queue. So from here, they also can do a double check, make sure they actually should be ordering that item. Are they putting some sort of character in front of it just to try to bypass the system?
Yep.
Have a little bit more control there.
Yep. And I think that, you know, when you start looking at sort of history, you know, a lot of organizations have processes where they put the X in front of, you know, the vendor item number or so forth. That's super helpful, right? And if you can get sort of that organizational compliance when they order specials, because then you can track it and report on it, and you're sort of looking for two things. Or three. You're looking for items that are getting ordered as specials which exist, which is sort of an education, or maybe that item description or those synonyms aren't good enough for them to find, or they're not on templates. You're looking for items that are not part of your item master, but that are ordered frequently enough that they should be. And you're also looking for maybe departments or requesters that tend to just X type it, and
Yes.
you know,
Do their own
sometimes
thing.
transparency say, hey, you know, everybody else is 2% and you're 50. Maybe if you want to sit down with us, that we could talk through it. So you know, all this data is available in there. It's not always easy to parse, but you know, you download it, you try to match it up, you clean it up, and you look for patterns.
Absolutely. So just pulling your PO line data and doing a comparison against your item master and your PO vendor item, it can be really helpful information. Build a custom report, have it available for your buyers on a monthly, even weekly basis that they go back and review and see what's going on with those items or departments.
Number 9, check your matching. So I know this is a supply chain oriented thing, right? And matching seems always that redheaded stepchild that doesn't belong to one set or the other. But I think that rethinking your matching is actually not as big an effort as it sounds. And even though a lot of that, you know, might fall on AP, there's a lot of downward consequences that take up time from the supply chain department. I think one thing throughout all these things we've been talking about is all these things are about reducing exceptions, automating processes. They're about reducing workload, right, and allowing the department to be less reactionary and more proactive. And at a higher level, you always start with process, and I'm not going to get into this too detailed right now, but what I found is getting AP and purchasing sort of around the same table. You'd be surprised how many conversations have just never occurred over 15 years and sort of understanding what each side is seeing. I say there's a couple things to really understand. There's a difference between entry and processing, so there's two different types of errors. If you're able to get the invoice entirely into Lawson, then Lawson has tools to drive its resolution. And you should trust them and use them. They work. They work for big organizations, process tens of thousands of invoices, and those include the MA-126, those include the MA-60.3, force match, those include chargebacks, those include PO cost messages. And they'll sort of route everything where it needs to go. Conversely, if you are not able to get all the data into Lawson, you can't find the vendor, PO is closed, item isn't on the PO line. You need to have other workarounds for that. Ideally, there's some sort of imaging system to route that back and forth. But maybe you're just stacking up that paper, walking over to purchasing. I mean, there's many different solutions for that. You just got to understand that those things don't lend themselves to Lawson, and just sort of commenting those into Lawson, you're creating double work. So that's high level. I've seen places where they have 50 different iterations, and you only need a few. It's like, can you get it into Lawson? No. Is it an AP issue or purchasing issue to resolve? If you can't get into Lawson, file it away. Let Lawson handle it. Follow those processes. Know who owns each one and have some monitoring. If you don't even want to get to that level, one thing I would recommend, very simple, is check your configuration. I mean, this has sort of become standardized throughout the industry. There is a set of best practices. Most organizations adopt them, some do not. And most of what matters here is this is the MA01 Match Company tab screen in the Messaging tab. And three things that I recommend checking. Number one, you have PO cost messages flagged to yes. The thing about PO cost messages is they don't require an action from AP to create, so there's no force match. They can get created before the receipt. And the main reason you have those is if you have a cost discrepancy, you want to know as soon as the invoice is entered, right, before you get 80 more messages for the same cost discrepancy, so somebody can either address it with the vendor or the contract. Very simple. It's a flag right here. You just want to check that it's flagged to yes. That means you're using them. If you're not using them, you're turning them on. There's a little bit of change management, but it's not very complicated. It's a single screen that's going to pop up. You're letting AP know that there's going to be this new message whenever there's something outside of tolerance in terms of the invoice unit cost versus the PO, and you're letting buyers know how to address it. Number two, there's a service flag, and I think this was when we went to 901, they expanded the options under here, and it used to be yes for turned on, but that turned into extended amount only, and you just want to make sure that that is B, which means I want to create messages for both over and under quantity and cost, and that's almost certainly what you want. Most of you have probably already seen that. That's an easy flip. It doesn't really change anything. What that B means is that Lawson will create buyer's message the way we expect them, the way we expect it will, the way you think it does right now, and hopefully you have it set that way.
Have we also found that some choose to just have over, like in the instances of service amounts? If they have a kind of a blanket amount for $10,000. So
you don't really distinguish here between amounts and not. So you're sort of making that choice. And I can see the argument for it. Certainly, I haven't seen a lot of customers do it. But usually, this comes to regular POs too, right? Have a 99% under tolerance. We don't care. We're going to pay it. Usually, that discrepancy at that level reflects some other issue. It's not the right line, not the right invoice. That comes back to bite you. It's rare that you're ordering something for $100 and they're charging you $1, and that's correct. Mm-hmm. And thirdly, there's this reconciliation match settings here. Over and under tolerance, they're set to no. And I want to spend a second talking about these because I've actually seen a lot of organizations where they're set to no. They should basically never be no. No matter what your process is, they should never be no. I think what I've seen is they're no because during the implementation process, the organization decided not to use recon messaging, and that's usually related to either an aversion to chargebacks or not wanting to have double messages, and I'm totally cool with any organization that does not want to use recon messaging. I recommend it, but you don't have to. For that no flag, it's extremely dangerous. You know, what that no flag means is that when I'm in a situation where I have an invoice discrepancy that's made it to my recon queue, I don't know if you can see here, but we have a invoice line at $30 a unit and a receipt line at $25 a unit. If I match it here in AP, what's going to happen is it's going to automatically just match it. And the reason it's doing that is because I have that flag set to no. So we think that flag set to no means we don't do this. But what it means is that Lawson is going to let me do this and just pay the invoice. And one of the things that I found is that even organizations where we find this, there's not a lot of appetite for trying to revisit the configuration, right? Nobody wants to fight that battle. But it's totally worth it. You're just processing all these invoices without anybody checking it. And I've seen it in lots of places. So hopefully that's not you guys. If it is, I mean, do the world a favor. Check it out. You know, do me a favor. Number 10.
Crazy Funhouse.
Crazy Funhouse. So, I mean, before we dive into contract management, obviously, Stephanie's very passionate about contract management. She's done some webinars, and I don't know if you guys have seen it. There's some more scheduled. Two things that I think has sort of held the market back from contract management, at least, you know, in my experience speaking with supply chain managers that were looking at it. One is that contract management and strategic sourcing, they sit on the Landmark platform. And so, you know, you'd have folks in SCM that are interested in looking at it, and IT departments that were resistant to add this platform to their mix and sustain it and so forth. Now, with version 10, Landmark has been introduced into pretty much all these organizations because of process flow and IPA. And the second one was, is this product really ready for prime time? So let me ask you, is this product really ready for prime time?
Absolutely. It's gotten a lot of love, a lot of attention the past few years. There's a lot of customers utilizing it, and that community base is really starting to build up to have other users to bounce ideas off of and more experts that have hands-on with the application. So I have a couple of slides available just to give you a snapshot of what it looks like. You know, Landmark is a little bit different of application to utilize, but if you're using Smart Office today, some of your users may be a little bit more comfortable, or it just looks really nice. It's a nice way to do your work. Yeah. Everything's organized, so you can find detail a little bit easier. There's still search bars to find that detail. You know, one of the biggest areas that has given contract management a lot of attention is the ability to allow specials on an agreement. So just having better management of those items, have them available in your system, have a little bit more control over it, all within Lawson, all of that detail there. It also can pull all of those transactions from your Lawson system, your financials, your purchase order data, to help bring that detail back and be able to do some spend analysis on those contracts, better manage your expirations. There's lots of reports available, inquiry screens. You know, there's a lot of different things to think about before implementation for helping to manage some of that detail and what users have access. But it's a great application that should definitely be looked at. I believe I have another slide that has some other areas. One of the features that I really, really like about contract management is the ability to personalize your view. Again, you can do this in Smart Office. So if you've had some access or demos of that system, it has the similar features where you can move columns around, add new. This also utilizes configuration consoles. So if you have some additional fields that are a part of your contract process, but maybe not necessarily part of your procurement process, but still need to be documented, you can easily add these new fields. As the administrator, you don't want everyone adding their own fields, but it gives you a lot more flexibility. Also the ability to add some ad hoc reports, just utilizing the system. So there's a lot you can do with it. And another area that I really like is it utilizes Spreadsheet Designer. So this is MS add-ins, but not the MS add-ins that you may know today. It's a way souped up version of it.
On steroids,
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And not only can you do uploads to the system, and it does have some smart logic there. If you name the column the same detail as the fields, it's not Control-Shift-O like it is in Lawson, it's Control-Shift-Click. If you name the column, when you're building that upload, it will just automatically map it for you. You don't have to find what fields and figure out what F number it is to map all that. It will help take the thinking out for you. And also, when you're querying information out, you can utilize the Excel functionality, so pivot tables and pivot charts, and then you can just refresh your query very quickly, and it will auto-magically update all your graphs for you.
Yeah, so this is a more serious project than some of the other ones we put. It takes a little bit more time, a little bit more effort. Not trying to imply that this is a simple one, but do think it's something that every supply chain department should be looking at because it has some really good functionality and it's sort of the advancement of Lawson over the last 10 years. Looks like we have a question here.
Quick question. Is there any way to import contracts from GPOs or GHX, et cetera?
So there's nothing out of the box today, but GHX and some of the other GPOs are becoming more familiar with the import contract management tool, so I see that coming soon. There are some things that you can do. If you have a standard way that data comes in, you can make a few configurations and then optimize that upload process. You also can utilize 832, so that's one way to import those contracts in. So if those organizations could set it to you that way, that would help speed up the process. So those are two other things.
And let me just add, there's a lot that Stephanie can say about this. In fact, she's got a whole presentation. And if you haven't seen it, I think we're doing it again either Tuesday or Wednesday, October 23rd, 24th. You can go to rpic.com/webinars and sign up for it. Highly encouraged. And also, we have an internal sandbox. Anytime you want to set up a WebEx and sort of talk about, whether it's a good fit for your organization and so forth, that's something we're happy to do. Obviously, you can reach out to Bill, you can reach out to Logan, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Stephanie. But before we go, we have a bonus 11.
Mobile apps.
Mobile apps.
All right. So if you click a couple more times, we have some little bumper car views here. So mobile apps are available. They are Apple only at this point in time. They are pretty low effort to deploy. We believe that they are no cost. However, there are some additional configurations that need to be made. And also, once you do configure it, there needs to be a process in your organization whether or not you're allowing it outside the firewall. So, this can be used on iPads if you have them throughout your organization, used for other areas, or perhaps one of the departments doesn't necessarily think the cost of the handheld is worth that. Over $1,000, where iPads, like $300 or something. It's less. So definitely something to look at. There's also other mobile apps available, like inventory control, not just requisitioning, and some of the other modules as well. So definitely
that is the future with V11. It's all going to be mobile apps. We're over. We are going to stick around for some questions, but for those of you that stuck around, need to go. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to attend the webinar. I want to thank Ms. Colwell for putting this together, and I want to thank her for giving me the opportunity to present on it. Some more webinars coming tomorrow, some more webinars coming next month, so please keep an eye out for those emails. Looks like we've spoken plenty.
Yeah.
We'll give it 30 seconds. Yeah.
If you do have questions, just tell them to shoot a email into webinars@rpic.
Yeah, webinars@rpic.com or any of our emails. One of the great things about RPI is you can contact us. I have an email too. It's kwayland@rpic.com. And if you email me, I will respond. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.